The 1863 civilians of Gettysburg were reluctant witnesses to the Great Battle. Join Ken Rich, the man in the red shirt, for his historic town walking tours. You could book these tours by emailing ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. That's ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. And when you're in town, look for the guy in the red shirt.
This episode of Addressing Gettysburg is brought to you in part by me, audiobook narrator Mike Scott. Narrator of Savis Beattie's Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864, and Unlike Anything That Ever Floated, the Monitor and Virginia and the Battle of Hampton Roads. If you are an author or publisher interested in having your titles produced as audiobooks, or even just in learning more about the process, give me a shout. You can find my contact info on my website, MikeScottVoice.com. That's MikeScottVoice.com.
And Civil War Trails. It's the world's largest open-air museum, and they offer over 1,300 sites across 6 states. Drive the Gettysburg campaign turn by turn, paddle to Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote earthworks and artillery positions. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure and explore their interactive map. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg's Ask a Gettysburg Guide. Today we are doing Kershaw's Brigade and the spot where the South lost the war. And that's here in Gettysburg, apparently. And we're going to find out just what that is. With us is a fan favorite. Someone, I got a lot of comments from people saying, you got to have more Ralph Siegel. So today we have more Ralph Siegel. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. Ralph Siegel. Welcome, Ralph.
Thank you very much.
You said you were nervous. No need to be nervous.
Very fun to be back.
It's always fun to have you. People really appreciate your humor and your style of telling stories. So no pressure. No pressure at all. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Make sure you have your notifications turned on. Also, if you use the Apple Podcast app, please leave a 5-star review. Reviews, liking, sharing, and subscribing are the best ways to help us grow our audience. Before we begin on the subject at hand, Ralph, you were on PCN recently, and you said you wanted to correct a few things.
The PCN, I was on a couple of, I did anniversary battle walks for the National Park, the July 1, 2, 3 battle walks. And in each time, working somewhat spontaneously, you have your notes, but you're trying to interact with the group. I made massive mistakes. And I also made mistakes in the peach orchard program, so this is a rare chance coming back again to fix the screw-ups from the earlier program. So for the PCN,
So what are the mistakes?
I did a battle walk that was filmed on PCN of Sheshanovsky's Brigade.
Okay.
And I talked about their background and the fierce fighting that they did at the Bronner Farm in the Battle of Chancellorsville. Okay. And that's a major brain fart because the Bronner Farm is in Manassas.
Manassas, yeah.
And the Hawkins Farm is at Chancellorsville where they put up a stand. So it's like, well, you got to be able to tell your farms apart. A better one I did a few years ago, I did my gunfight at the Peach Orchard program for the Park Service, and it was filmed. And I talked about Lieutenant McQueen, who brought a section, actually a single howitzer forward from one of Hood's batteries. On July 3rd, a howitzer can be manhandled without the horses and pulled it up within range to fire on McGillivray's artillery line prior to Pickett's charge. It was a great heroic movement, and his name is Lieutenant William McQueen. Would be added to the Confederate Roll of Honor, was sort of their version of the Medal of Honor list, and when I did the program, I identified him as Lieutenant Steve McQueen. And then when I'm at home, I got the disc. You get the discs. You don't get paid, but they give you the disc.
Right.
And I'm watching it, and I'm there. And then Lieutenant Steve McQueen moved his batteries up, and I'm like, "You're going to get that, aren't you? You're gonna reel that one back and say, oh, excuse me, folks, I'm sorry. I said Steve. No, I didn't. So I'm correcting it now for anyone who has the...
I made a similar mistake. August 20th, we did a show, an in-person show at the Farnsworth House, and Six Questions Lentz was there, and he had on a bowler hat and a green T-shirt that one of our friends, Mike Stretch, made for him that had 6 question marks on it. And when I was going around pointing people out in the audience, and when I got to him, I said, people can't tell if he's the Riddler or if he's Roddy McDowell in A Clockwork Orange, but it was Malcolm McDowell who was in A Clock. Right. So I had the luxury of going in and cutting out the Roddy McDowell part. So unless you were there, and you're listening to this now, of course, those are the only people who know the mistake I made.
So now people who have those PCN DVDs, they can write on the DVD cover, William McQueen, not Steve.
There you go.
Parentheses, moron. At the we were talking about modern-day artillery. I got a call like within 24 hours from a guy I've had on tours from Fort Dix. He heard the podcast. I mean, obviously it wasn't broadcast when we did, but when it came on, when it came on the air or was released, within 24 hours he called me up and said, don't you ever learn anything? And so we talked about the modern-day artillery in comparison to the Civil War artillery, and I mentioned the 155 millimeter howitzer.
Yes.
Which I identified as the Excalibur.
Yes.
And he explained to me, no, it's called the Paladin. The 155 millimeter self-propelled howitzer is a Paladin.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that.
The ammunition that it fires is called the Excalibur, which is a satellite-guided rocket shell. Jeez. And I'm like, so I just basically morphed the two together.
Yeah.
And I did ask him politely, who besides you is going to pick up that mistake? And he goes, well, no one, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly, right. It's about learning.
God will know. More embarrassing error is that I mentally interchanged enfilade with defilade when we were talking about artillery and infantry action on the field. And I kept saying they have perfect defilade fire, and the correct term is enfilade fire.
And what is the difference?
Defilade is something different. Defilade is when you take a position in which the natural contours of the ground help protect and conceal you.
Right. So like in Private Ryan, when they're storming the beach and he says, we'll have good defilade from over there.
Yes.
Yes.
Or, more to our topics, the infantry line on Cemetery Ridge was taking advantage of a defilade position beneath the crest.
Got it.
Of the ridge. Enfilade is firing into a flank.
Right, okay.
And I said it like 50 times wrong. It's just like I just had the wrong word in my head, and I'm amazed you asked me back, except you didn't know that I made those errors, and now you're full of regret.
No, they've been brought to my attention, but I think you brought the Paladin one to my attention in an email, right?
Yeah, I did afterward. Like in case you're getting 100 calls. Of course, you got none.
No, I didn't get anybody about that. Yeah,
because only nerds know.
Somebody did mention the difference between enfilade and defilade.
Oh,
and you kept saying defilade. Yeah,
that was.
But not a lot, and I think a lot of people realize, you're talking off the cuff. Exactly, you're going to say the wrong word. They do it all the time, except it's not recorded. That's the only difference.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to be in your spot here, with us, these professional, world-famous broadcasters.
Who know how to get through underneath the shield.
Yes. Right. We get what we want.
So exposing myself to maximum ridicule, our theme is, and I think it's very important to me, is the exact spot, the exact square foot of dirt where you can stand and know that that's the spot where the Confederacy lost the Civil War.
Right, and it's not Pickett's charge in your estimation.
No, it's not. And
it's Kershaw's brigade.
And maybe, it's a sublime experience for me. Some people get this at the Point of Woods at Pickett's charge or by walking Pickett's charge. That, to me, this is the Rose Lane leading down to the Rose Farm. It's hallowed ground, and I stand at that spot, and I just get shivers on my spine. I've taken tour groups there. They don't get the same reaction at all. They barely can follow what I'm trying to tell them, and I've yet to find the second person who will have that experience, that transformative, life-changing experience of standing on that square foot of ground. and seeing where the South lost the war.
Now, when you're standing there looking at the farmhouse, I'm assuming, right? So you're a little bit behind the barn, like west of the barn.
Yeah,
Is that what you're talking?
Actually, the square foot could be anywhere between the Emmitsburg Road and the barn.
Right, okay.
The square foot's in there somewhere. I've just selected a spot where I have shade from the tree and I can see everything.
Gotcha.
We
So
don't know where the square foot
the
really
square
was.
foot is somewhere within the realm of Kershaw's influence, Kershaw's
Yes.
Brigade's influence and track, but we don't know, or path.
But we don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
No.
We've got the climax set up, and after 4 or 5 hours, we'll get there.
Yeah.
But that's my belief. Here's where it comes from. You know, you and I, we can write a book about Chickamauga.
Okay.
Or we can write a book about Shiloh. We can.
Sure.
The sources are there. The stuff is there. What we can't find in the books, Eric knows.
Right.
And so we can sit here and write a book about Shiloh.
What Eric doesn't know, I'll make up.
There's a well-known author who wrote a book about Antietam. I like his book, so I don't want to pick on him, and I'm not going to name him. But I've been on battlefield tours at Antietam where they have said to me, you know, we've read that book, we've studied that book, and I'm convinced he never set foot on the battlefield. They don't mean that politely.
Right.
And I'm like, well, you know, the Ivory Tower Ackham edition. But there's something to that.
Sure.
You know, battlefield guides, folks like you that get out on the field, those of us who are in the Gettysburg world, we walk the ground and we learn the nuances of how the field folds and how you walk 20 feet and you can see something. You walk 20 feet the other way, now you can't see it anymore.
That's right, yeah.
And you start to reinterpret. You start to see things like, wait a minute, there's something that I assumed here that can't be. And to jump a little ahead, the star of our show is Brigadier General Joseph Kershaw.
Right.
And we'll be talking about him, Joseph Kershaw and his official records. And in his article in Century Magazine, which most people will know and collected in the Battles and Leaders volumes published later, and his letters to John Batchelder, talks about that his objective was to attack the Stony Hill. You know, that part of the wheat field that's right behind the Rose Farm.
Yeah.
Frequently, don't you think, Eric, is frequently considered part of the wheat field battlefield?
Yeah.
And I'm going to start lobbying that it should be treated as a separate thing.
Okay. Stony
Hill is so important that it should be separated from the wheat field and thought of as because it was so critical. And to me, that was the Stony Hill played a key role in the theme of where the South lost the war. And to start at the beginning of where the walking tour would be is at the South Carolina Memorial, which is on West Confederate Avenue. I think I sent you a picture of the South Carolina Memorial. Mm-hmm. Very interesting memorial dedicated in the height of the Civil Rights Movement. Mm-hmm. On
is that
July
Huey
2nd.
Long? Is that Huey Long there in the picture? This guy?
No,
Who's
it's
that?
not. I'm not sure who that is, but that's Senator James O. Eastland, the little guy who's one of the extreme segregationists from the South. He's not from South Carolina, neither.
Right.
The keynote speaker at the dedication of the South Carolina Memorial is George Wallace.
Right, that's right.
And we have a picture of him laying a wreath at the Eternal Peace Light. He came up for this is all the centennial, the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. And George Wallace was probably the leading celebrity. You've had Jill Titus on, right?
Yeah.
Her new book has come out.
Yep.
A lot of the information I got from her before her book came out for this, when I did the South Carolina Kershaw tour. He was the biggest celebrity here. People, he'd made a big name for himself, somewhat infamous celebrity. He just got elected in January. He he hired a Klan leader as his speechwriter, who Asa, what was his name? Let me give names to things.
Ace the
Wallace
Klansman.
had run for governor before and lost to the Attorney General John Patterson in 1958 because John Patterson was famous for having driven the NAACP out of Alabama, having identified it as a criminal conspiracy organization and was going to charge him with crimes. And Patterson would himself admit that he beat Wallace in the primary for a Democratic nomination because Wallace was soft on the question of racial segregation. So in 1962, when Wallace was running for governor, he didn't make that mistake, quote unquote, again.
Right.
And he became a hardcore racist segregationist.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets elected. He hires Asa Earl Carter, who's a big Klan leader, as his speechwriter. And that guy writes the Segregation Now, Segregation Forever speech.
Okay.
Then in June, the Gettysburg reunion's in July. In June, Wallace is blocking the courthouse steps, University of Alabama, the university steps to refuse to let black students enter, and has the National Guard out guarding against black students getting into the school. So this guy is nationally renowned leader of the white supremacy segregationist movement when he comes to Gettysburg to dedicate South Carolina Memorial. I'm hopeful that all of our Confederate memorials will be preserved in the national parks, so we've made some efforts to lobby for that. Hope to protect them because they preserve and tell this story. The South Carolina Memorial, I think, is a fascinating artifact of the lost cause.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only monument that refers to states' rights. The soldiers were fighting for states' rights.
Right. The right to what?
And I'll argue with them when I stand there. I'll make the argument that they're the only Confederate state that has the right to use the phrase states' rights in their argument in favor of their secession and starting the war. Because states' rights was a serious legal issue dividing the country in the 1830s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the godfather of the states' rights movement was John C. Calhoun from Yale University, Southern political leader. He's the Secretary of War, which was a very important job, the aftermath of the War of 1812, Secretary of War for James Monroe. And back then, you got the second most votes for president, you were vice president.
Right.
Which wasn't necessarily a great idea. So he's a vice president for John Quincy Adams, runs again, is the vice president for Andrew Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And under the Adams administration, they had passed the Tariffs to protect northern textile industries from cheap British imports. The British were subsidizing textile imports to try to undercut and bankrupt American businesses before they could get started because they wanted to maintain their monopoly on, selling the Americans clothing.
Right.
So the tariffs were protectionism to give the mills in New York City, Boston, Lowell, Massachusetts a chance to actually begin operating and selling some product and getting some capital. And John C. Calhoun, this became the huge cause because the Southerners, of course, were not producing these things, but they were paying the tariffs, and so it was raising their costs. And his ideas are dismissed today, but I think he had a fascinating idea. At that time, there are 15 states. Maine and Vermont had joined, and I think it may have been more, but it was certainly at least 15. And he had an interesting idea. His idea was this. Looking at the United States Constitution, a state has a right to nullify an act of Congress that they don't like. Now, this is only 15 states at the time.
Right.
And if Congress insists that their law should not be nullified, they should vote to amend the Constitution. And 2/3 of the states have to pass a constitutional amendment. So 10 states pass it, then South Carolina has to accept, even though they may have voted no.
Right.
If 10 other states approve, in this case, the congressional tariff, That was his overriding idea.
I kind of like that idea.
It's not now today with 50 states and 10,000 pieces of legislation every session. We look at it as far-fetched, but it's very important when we look back into history to not judge by present-day standards.
Right.
Back then, the government was new. The Constitution was 40 years old.
Right.
You know, Andrew Jackson was a war veteran, a kid, but he had been wounded in the war. John C. Calhoun had close relatives. He was alive during the war. This is all a fresh experiment. And his idea was if a state is offended, let Congress add an amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah.
And
I like the idea.
We get outvoted.
I like it because it kind of emasculates and neuters Congress.
Now, his idea was we're not going to get anywhere with Adams. We'll wait till Jackson takes over because Jackson, good Tennessee slave owner, can be counted on.
Right.
To when he gets becomes president, he'll be with us.
Right.
And they dramatically misjudged Andrew Jackson, who's been getting canceled in a lot of corners because of his racist Indian policies. But I think it's always important to take a president and a presidency as a whole. He was the first real defender of federal authority when it was seriously threatened. Mm-hmm. I mean, Thomas Jefferson had his ideas, and him and Adams went back and forth, but this was a serious threat to the United States Constitution and to the existence of the federal government. And Andrew Jackson stepped up and said, "You are just wrong." And Calhoun quit and went back to Charleston. He I don't want to be vice president anymore. And the nullification of crisis of 1832 is what it's called. And it was over tariff, and it was the idea of states having independent rights. Now, slavery was in the back of everybody's mind at that time as that's going to be the next issue. But it was not the issue then.
But that's the problem, though, with Calhoun's idea.
Well, it wasn't, Calhoun was a slave owner. He had,
and that's probably why he liked that idea, because he knew slavery was on the chopping block down the road.
Tariffs was not in the 1830s. He wouldn't know that.
But it's always been an issue, hasn't it? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's always been people that thought it was wrong.
You have abolitionist corners, but they hardly had any political gravity.
Right. It's not like in the 1850s as they were starting to get a little louder.
Much different environment. I have a quote on that line from Calhoun. Let's see how I can. For those listening at home,
he's turning pages in his binder, his trapper keeper. And he's looking to see.
The nullification crisis did prompt Calhoun to address slavery, and not really slavery as much. Because remember, the war is not the people who are seceding, who want to break away from the federal government. They like to throw it at you. Well, most of them didn't own slaves. Yeah, well, a lot of them. Estimated a third of the families owned slaves. The majority of them, fewer than 10. But it was universally acknowledged that the races have to remain separate and that the white race is superior.
Right.
White supremacy was not in question.
Right.
So anyone who says, well, they didn't have slaves, yeah, but they're still advocates of white supremacy. And a quote from Calhoun to the importance of the nullification crisis battle, that the reason why South Carolina has to prevail, which it didn't, was to maintain the existing relations between the two races inhabiting that section of the Union is indispensable to the peace and happiness of both. It cannot be subverted without drenching the country in blood. So in 1832, he's forecasting the American Civil War.
Exactly.
Now, almost like what John Brown said,
Yeah.
Well, we cannot eliminate the scourge of slavery except by blood.
But I don't think that's what's the word? Prescient? Is that the word I'm looking for?
1830, I think it's pretty good.
Well, but I mean, you got to know in 1803 that the people, I mean, look, if slavery wasn't so important to the South, they would have agreed to abolish it at the founding of the country.
Oh, there would have been no country. Yeah,
but I'm saying,
Franklin said when the Constitution was signed, Benjamin Franklin said, "There's a snake. Slavery is the snake that's under the table."
Yeah,
they all recognize. That slavery is an issue we're just not touching. Otherwise, we lose half the colonies.
Well, right, but that's my point, though, is that slavery was always something that they were going to go down in flames over.
But the nullification, the states' rights crisis, was specifically over the politically unpopular tariffs.
Right.
Because nobody in Washington, the president was a slave owner. Nobody in Washington was saying anything out loud about slavery. The federal government was not representing opposition to slavery. The political explosion in Charleston and Columbia was over the tariffs and the impact on revenue.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the idea of us giving revenue to the federal government. The Northern belief, which became, decades later, Abraham Lincoln, and the Republican belief, is that the federal government should interfere with the economy by improving infrastructure. Build rails, build bridges, build ports. In the South, that was not accepted. That's private sector. The private sector does that. The government shouldn't interfere with, providing economic resources. That's unfair. And you're collecting our taxes and spending it on commercial ventures.
Right.
Today, we take it for granted. We look to the government to take care of ports, bridges, and highways.
Yeah, right.
This wasn't settled back then.
Okay.
This was the birth of this idea. And so, like, you're charging a tariff on the imports we're bringing in from Europe. Our people are paying more. The money is going north, and it's going to build bridges and ports and railroads to enhance businesses that are competing with southern businesses, and we're not getting any of that infrastructure improvement. And so there was a lot to this states' rights quarrel. And so to me, by the time we get to the 1860s, and we talk about the South Carolina Memorial, the other 10 states claiming states' rights is a bumper sticker.
Okay.
You're fighting to maintain white supremacy. You want to have an independent country so you can have a slave empire and keep the races separate. That's why you're going to war. But for South Carolina, I think people can accept the more nuanced, broader question that, nullification of states' rights has been a struggle here for more than a generation.
Okay. So in other words,
our leading figure, John C. Calhoun, he's dead for 10 years by the time the troubles begin.
But in other words, I just want to make sure I can summarize this accurately. South Carolina had a decades-long argument with the federal government over many things. And then by the time we get to the 1860s and there's at least... Well, it's like maybe the abolitionist movement is getting a little stronger to the point where they're a little more threatening.
Well, William Seward is certainly one of the most profound, and quite a few senators, Zachariah Chandler and Charles Sumner, are very influential politicians who are hardcore abolitionists who didn't exist in the 1830s. There was no one like them in the 1830s. Right. So you certainly have
now there's these people in power.
Abolitionists who are in power, but they are not the majority of the party.
No, but
they're there.
When you're paranoid and you're sick of fighting the same fight for decades, it doesn't take much for you to just say, that's it, I'm done.
And they're electing a president who promised that slavery was not a primary issue to him, except that required ignoring what he'd been saying prior to running for president.
Right.
Like during the Lincoln-Douglas debates and his House Divided Cannot Stand speeches and his other writings that he was offended by seeing the slave trade when he saw slaves being transported in the town where he grew up in Salem in Illinois. Mm-hmm. And so it's a lifelong abhorrence to slavery. But he wasn't running on that.
Right.
But, somewhat like today, I think, the voters in the South didn't care. Well, the politicians in the South didn't care what he said. They didn't believe him.
Right.
They said he is going to try to kill slavery.
Yeah.
And there was no real evidence of that right away, but that became the second lightning rod from the rebirth of the nullification crisis.
Okay.
Simply put, they seceded from the Union because they didn't like who got elected president.
Yeah.
How similar does that?
They took their ball and went home.
How familiar does that sound?
It's happened like 6 times in the last 20 years.
one of the senior leaders in the legal community, a legislator, I think he was not in office at the time anymore, was James Pettigrew. I keep forgetting his name, so I put it actually in my shirt, so let me make sure I have it correct. I Googled it. Yeah, James Pettigrew, not our Pettigrew, different spelling. And he gave that great quote when the secession was passed, South Carolina being the first state to pass the secession, and he said, South Carolina, too small to be republic, too large to be an insane
Oh, yeah. All right,
so
wait.
South Carolina carries extra meaning, and to me there's a karma in the fact that it's South Carolina Brigade that is involved at Gettysburg in the act that, to me, ended their chance to win the battle.
Okay, now let's get into that. How?
Well, first premise that half your podcast viewers are clicking off now is you need to accept, as I do, and I understand that many don't, but I think a lot do, that the Confederacy, with victory at Gettysburg, could end the war.
Okay.
Now, we get a lot of people, and some of it is lost cause rewriting, that try to minimize the importance of the Battle of Gettysburg over the century, over the decades, because it's a great embarrassment to Robert E. Lee, and they want to deify Robert E. Lee, the flawless, the marble man.
Right.
And so Gettysburg gets minimized in importance. Not when you read the letters, not when you read the accounts, not when you read from what some of these soldiers had to say about the battle. I have, let me look into some of my notes here, where I will not find what I'm looking for.
It's always tough to go back and find something when you're looking for
John
it.
Gorman, captain in the 2nd North Carolina. We are doubtless on the eve of the most decisive moment of the war. David Atchison, 140th Pennsylvania, famous guy. His stone was marked. This is to be the campaign of the war, and the rebels have staked their all upon it. Mm-hmm. Lieutenant Henry Clare, 83rd New York. If defeat should be our lot, then farewell Washington, administration, country, and all.
So they all knew.
In the as yet unpublished Peach Orchard book that I'm working on, as unfinished.
Right.
I gave you the tour guide companion.
Yep.
Peach Orchard, a Gettysburg Battlefield guided tour, $21.95 at Fort Historian.
That's right.
The Heritage.
Mention addressing Gettysburg and get a 20% discount.
Amazon.com, mention Gettysburg at Fort Historian. That was the companion tour guide, the main book I'm still working on. And in there, I will point out that, I like Michael Shara. I like his flaws in the novel, but I like the Killer Angels, and I like the words he puts into Robert E. Lee's mouth. It is fictional, but I think they're right. In the morning is the great battle. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow or the next day will decide the war. Virginia is here. South Carolina, all of the South is here. What will you do tomorrow? That's gotten washed away over the time. I think Sherrod did something to bring that back. Alexander Hayes, Brigadier General from Pittsburgh. I was fighting for my native state. Before I went in, I thought of those at home that I so dearly loved. If Gettysburg is lost, all is lost for them. This is the climactic battle. In my view, as I was talking to Peach Orchard, if Robert E. Lee can break up the Army of the Potomac, his great frustration at the Battle of Fredericksburg is after slaughtering 13,000. They pulled back onto Stafford Heights on the other side of the river, and he couldn't get at him. Yeah. His frustration after the Battle of Chancellorsville, which I've learned a lot about since the last time we were here. He did a great bus tour down at Chancellorsville with Greg Mertz. It was wonderful. 4 days on the battlefield in buses. Had a completely different view of Chancellorsville. Get at them before they get back across the river. His frustration at the battle, that he couldn't get at the Army. He had them, and he couldn't get at the Army of the Potomac. And I believe that he started to turn it into a rhetorical great victory to honor Stonewall Jackson, because his attitude and writings and statements after Jackson died changed. Up until then, I think he was frustrated with Chancellorsville and didn't see it as a great triumph. He also saw it as mad, stupid luck.
Yeah.
I think
he had to.
I mean, at any moment, something could have happened to Joe Hooker, and a real general could have taken over the Army, and the war would have ended on May 3rd or May 4th. Yeah. Because his army was set to be destroyed by the Army of the Potomac.
Well, and Lee was in, he had half his army away looking for food, right?
Not half, but Longstreet.
But a good chunk of his army.
Divisions. Yeah, but he further divided his army into 3 pieces.
Yeah.
a risky move.
But
Brilliant.
my point is things weren't going too well for them if they had to send 2 divisions away to find
and
food.
I think
and
in his heart of hearts, he was like, man, we just got away with murder on this one.
He had to.
And so Gettysburg, is frequently, the great triumph of Chancellorsville, they're full of whiskey and oats, and they're going to march north and show the Yankees how they can fight. And I think it was more like we're getting desperate here. We got to get something happening, or we're going to, Vicksburg's under attack. Rosecrans is moving to divide the country really in half by moving into Georgia. Threatening to. He's moving south in that direction, which is where he will end up by the end of the summer. And there's a desperation to it.
But do you think the common soldier is thinking we're desperate?
The morale, because once Jackson actually died 5 or 6 days after the battle, then it became the great victory, because the honor Jackson became the great victory.
Got it.
And so morale is high, but there's a desperation to it. And I believe if he finally gets what he couldn't get at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, if he gets to break up the Union Army and get new supplies, get new ammunition, and move into northern Maryland, I say it's a checkmate.
Right.
He doesn't have to attack Washington.
Right.
And people all say, well, Washington's so heavily fortified. I've done fortification tours of Washington, and there's a fort here and there's a fort there. So you know what? You go between them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You hit one fort with a brigade, you hit the other fort with a brigade, and then you
send everybody else through the middle.
Yeah. Like forts, you know what I mean? They figured this out in the Franco-Prussian War, Forts.
Yeah, I never understood why you just couldn't go out of the way of the fort.
They were great when knights were riding around with armor.
Right, and you had to get up close.
Throwing rocks at each other with catapults. But
all right, but so let's get to
Lee
Gettysburg here.
You have to agree that Lee, the Confederates could win the war. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the rest of the war, and the Confederates were on the defensive. This was their opportunity to win the war by force of arms on the battlefield.
Okay.
They could still win the war by delaying through politics. Mm-hmm. Lincoln in 1864 predicts he will not get reelected, and when he loses, they will sue for peace, and the Confederacy will become independent.
Right.
The fall of Atlanta changed that, but he doesn't foresee that happening.
No.
And so the Confederate, but to my mind, at Gettysburg is the Confederacy's last chance to actually win on a battlefield.
Yes.
And the object is Cemetery Hill. Break the Union position. That's the Napoleon's decisive point. Mm-hmm. However large the defense is, doesn't matter. If you concentrate your forces and smash the decisive point, wherever that happens to be, and in Lee's judgment, that was Cemetery Hill, you will win the battle. You will have the Baltimore Pike. You can scatter the Army of the Potomac. You can attack it in pieces, and you can move your entire army into northern Maryland, where you're threatening either Baltimore or Washington. And this is utter speculation, because we don't know what happened except the quotes we had of people saying how close we are to this. Robert E. Lee himself, quoted by Isaac Trimble, If we would win the fight here, then the war will be over and we shall achieve the recognition of our independence. Bruce Catton, a most celebrated historian, talking about the Army of the Potomac. If the Army had developed the swift, instinctive reflexes, which are all that would serve in the moment of disaster, then the situation might be saved. If not, then the war was about over. That's him discussing the Army of the Potomac and Meade approaching Gettysburg. So it's not an isolated point of view at all. So they can win the war by winning the battle at Gettysburg. Where did they fail to win? And I argue that it was on the Rose Farm Lane.
Okay, on the lane.
All right, on the Rose Farm Lane.
Okay.
Where a decision was made to attack Stony Hill.
Okay, so let's back up, though.
Let's back up.
Pause right here, yeah. So just give us an overview of the part, the action,
What's
the
happening?
big action, this is a part of.
We have the famous countermarch.
Mm-hmm.
McLaws' division, followed by Hood's division, marching in the morning to get to Warfield Ridge. Some people call it Seminary Ridge. The Warfield Ridge opposite the Peach Orchard. They're going to march to get there. They're going to march. Robert E. Lee's instructions are to march into the Peach Orchard, unfurl your battle flags, form the lead division as Lafayette McLaws' division, form your brigades into battle lines, and follow the Emmitsburg Road north towards Cemetery Hill. Roll up the Union flank, smash the Cemetery Ridge defenses, hit Cemetery Hill. W. Dorsey Pender's division is over by the area of the Thomas McMillan farm, further up Cemetery Ridge, ready to charge into the breach that Longstreet's divisions, First Corps divisions of James Longstreet are supposed to make. Major General John Bell Hood is coming. His division is coming behind McLaws to support McLaws on the attack. And as McLaws rolls up the Emmitsburg Road, Third Corps brigades under the command of Division Commander Richard Anderson will join in the attack, coming in from the left. Cadmus Wilcox's Alabama Brigade first. We talked about them a lot last time. And then followed on by the Florida Brigade of David Lang and the Georgia Brigade of Ambrose Rand's Wright, coming in as McLaws advances up the Emmitsburg Road. That is and guns galore, 3 battalions on the flanks firing, and that was the idea. And, of course, when they got to Warfield Ridge, they saw that the peach orchard was heavily occupied. So that plan was not going to work.
Right.
So instead of McLaws leading the attack, McLaws holds a position on Warfield Ridge, and John Bell Hood marches through, we talked about it last time, marches through the Eisenhower farm, stops towards the house, then the Beesecker farm, and moves south onto Warfield Ridge. And he's going to hit the peach orchard in the flank. And when he gets there, of course, he sees the situation is different, and the big Rocky Mountain. From that vantage point, Devil's Den and Little Round Top appear to be the same thing. You don't see that there's a gap between them.
Right, they do, yeah.
The beavers are doing their work, but you can't see it behind the Devil's Den. And so,
and you're Team Beaver, by the way. Let the audience know.
Yes, I am. Have officially Team Beaver.
And the official line of Team Beaver people is that we don't care about this park or its history. So I just want you to know that.
Oh, well.
We care more about a swamp rat than we do a
Team Beaver T-shirt is in my laundry pile. Maybe it'll have to be. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah,
at any rate,
you didn't even know what team you were signing up with.
Yeah, so it's a funny T-shirt. Team Mozart and that guy on the picture. And so Hood's attack goes off the rails. And Hood himself is with the Texas Brigade, which is his old famous brigade. He's got 4 brigades in his division, but he can only be in one place. So he's with the Texas Brigade. And the Texas Brigade itself splits in half.
Right.
Half of them are headed toward the Rocky Mountain where they're getting shot at by cannon and the infantry is lined up through the Rose Farm. And the other half is going up the Emmitsburg Road toward the peach orchard, thinking, I think this is what we're supposed to do.
Right.
And then they look to the right and they see the rest of the brigade going down the slope. And Hood is with them. And he goes, I guess we're supposed to be over there. And so they all go that way and the whole attack goes off to the right.
Right.
So the Texas Brigade and George Benning's Georgia Brigade. Did I call him Benning? Did I just screw up his name?
What did you say? I didn't hear what you said.
George Benning.
George Benning. No, I don't. Did you say George Benning?
I did. And I don't.
Well, now I can't think of another name. Henry. Yeah.
I knew that. I was just seeing if you paid attention over there with those rabbit ears on your head. Henry Benning's brigade.
Right.
Coming in support of the Texas regiments that are hitting the Devil's Den. George Tige Anderson's brigade comes marching in behind the Texans, and he veers to the left, going into the Rose Woods, the woods between the Devil's Den and the wheat field. And he's heading that way. So they're all down there. And the idea is they could sweep the Union up, push them all the way back towards Cemetery Ridge, and then the troops in the peach orchard are going to have to leave.
Yeah.
Because their rear just left.
Right.
And so McLaws can march out, and, we can save Plan A. But, of course, Hood is in for a severe fist fight.
Yeah.
And while they do capture the Devil's Den, they don't extend much beyond that. There's heavy fighting. And George Anderson's brigade is lined up facing north, roughly, it's more an angle, but facing north with the 9th Georgia, 8th Georgia, the 56th Georgia, the 59th Georgia.
Doesn't matter.
Sorry, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter a little bit.
With a few
But the
brigades.
important ones are the 9th and 8th Georgias, whose commanders are down, so they have junior officers in command. They're on the left end. And now, with Hood's 4 brigades fully engaged, the Alabamans we didn't mention, they're going up Big Round Top, looking for Little Round Top.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time they got to Little Round Top, Jeff Daniels is
there.
swinging a sword. And
Yeah.
off we go with that. Now it's time for McLaws' division to get engaged. Now, his biggest combat brigade is the South Carolina Brigade. They led the countermarch.
So they're the first ones.
They're the brigade that got up to Bream's Ridge when McLaws and Longstreet came up and looked and said, we can't go this way. The signalman, Little Round Top, could see us.
Yeah.
It was Kershaw that was in the front. They're the ones that turned around and backed up.
Okay.
Went all the way back to where they started to find a route where they wouldn't be seen.
Right.
So Kershaw is leading. Kershaw is the senior brigadier general. Kershaw will become the division commander when McLaws is out in next spring.
Okay.
So he's overdue for division command. A lot of historians will say this is a guy who's underassigned commanding a brigade. But it's a big brigade, 2,400 men. He started with that brigade in 2nd South Carolina. The former brigade commander is John Bonham.
Ah, the drummer.
No, I think I just messed that up too. But see, that's the nice thing is I can catch myself.
Keith Moon.
I'm going Millage Luke Bonham. John was his brother. And James died at the Alamo. So Millage Bonham is the original commander, known as Luke. Luke Bonham was the original commander of this brigade. And Kershaw took command when Bonham got elected governor.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's a big pedigree with these guys.
Sure.
And so Kershaw himself is a affluent guy, but he had a hard scrabble existence. Eric, we got some Kershaw. I got a photograph of Kershaw that doesn't get used that much. They all use the painting.
How old a gentleman was Kershaw?
He's 41 years old.
41.
He's from Camden, which is the main town of Kershaw County, named after his family.
Oh, okay. What did his family do?
They're planters.
Planters.
Slave owners, planters, big aristocrats, owned tens of thousands of acres, but they're all dead. He's an orphan at the age of 7.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So he has to, for his affluence, he has a hard scrabble existence. By the age of 21, he's studied the bar and he's become a lawyer. So he's making up for himself, but he also feels loyalty to the country, becomes an officer in the Mexican War. Has his different things, fights at Malvern Hill where the brigade is heavily engaged and has heavy losses. So he's a skilled combat commander, has a big role in the capture of Harper's Ferry. He particularly distinguished himself at the Battle of Fredericksburg.
Yeah.
Where his South Carolina brigade is along the wall in front of Maurice Heiss next to Thomas Cobb's Georgia Brigade.
Right.
Thomas
That
Cobb.
is later Semmes's brigade?
Right.
Cobb, right.
Semmes is but Cobb is KIA at Maurice Heights, and Kershaw takes command of both brigades on the fly. Riding up and down the sunken road lane on horseback. The higher command is saying, okay, there's a guy with some mustard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kershaw, this is a top shelf guy.
Cojones.
Yeah. So his and he will write in his report that we moved across the Emmitsburg Road and headed towards Stony Hill. And we were being attacked from the left by artillery from the peach orchard. So I sent half of my brigade to deal with them.
Right. So wait, so he's got the 2nd South Carolina, 3rd South Carolina Battalion.
Yeah, we call them the James Battalion to keep life simple.
Okay, the James Battalion. Because there's also the 3rd South Carolina Regiment.
Right.
Then the 7th, 8th, and 15th. 2,183 strong.
Yeah.
And they're going to lose 649 at this
I
battle.
round them up a little bigger than that.
All right. Well,
But
either way.
That's the line they're on. So he is with his center, which is the 3rd and the 7th, moving toward the Rose Farm. His deputy in the 2nd South Carolina, his original regiment, who took over when he moved up, was Lieutenant Colonel John Kennedy. And so he puts
Era.
Kennedy in command of the left wing. And he says, you take your regiment, the James Battalion, and the 8th South Carolina, and you turn north, and you hit the Peach Orchard.
Right.
And I'm going to go hit Stony Hill. He writes the Century Magazine article. We made across and going to hit Stony Hill. And what I talk about before, how we could write a book about Shiloh or Chickamauga, never go there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're tramping the battlefield, and, we're looking at things. And I finally one day I'm looking over, and this is all me, by the way. My co-author, Mike Vallone, was gone by the time. And none of this is in my Peach Orchard tour guide. We talk about Kershaw's attack and the split and all of that, and Kershaw's brigade breaking into 3 pieces, essentially. But this little theory of mine is my own. I can't blame Mike. Can't see the Stony Hill from over there.
From where?
From where Kershaw was.
Which is where, again?
He's on Warfield Ridge.
On Warfield Ridge, right.
He's going to march
Correct.
across.
It looks like woods. That's all it is from
He's
there.
going to march. No, you can't see it at all. You can see the treetops, maybe.
The treetops, yeah.
Yeah, but you don't know what it is.
No.
Because the Emmitsburg Road is a ridge. It drops down.
Uh-huh.
And you don't really know what's on the other side of the Emmitsburg Road.
Correct.
How can he intend to attack the Stony Hill? He writes that report because he knows that's what he did do.
Right.
But there's no way he intended to do that when he began.
No. Yeah, how
Because
could he?
How does he know what it even is?
Right. He didn't do a reconnaissance
But
out there.
he says this with the official report, and he says this was the article in Battles and Leaders, and he writes letters to Batchelder. He says this all the time. But with Batchelder, he lets a little tidbit slip that he hasn't mentioned prior. The little James Longstreet marches out with him all the way to the Emmitsburg Road.
Yes.
He doesn't mention that in his official report. He doesn't write that in a Tribune article. And James Longstreet would be subject to a lot of post-war ridicule for his decision to join the Republican Party and work for his best friend Ulysses S. Grant and do jobs and take important assignments from the federal government. And they consider that an immense betrayal.
Sure.
Another thing Longstreet didn't help himself with was his pen. These important moments in Longstreet's official reports are mentioned in a paragraph. He doesn't go into detail.
Okay.
And by the time he writes his autobiography from Manassas to Appomattox, he's got so many axes to grind that when you read about his Gettysburg account, it's basically a rant. He just doesn't really explain who's where, except maybe in a paragraph. It's like, man, you could have given us some detail.
Right.
Like, did you go out to the Emmitsburg Road? What did you do when you were out there? What's going on? So I was like, this is interesting. Now, the commander of the Corps is going out to the Emmitsburg Road with the brigade commander, his lead brigade coming out of McLaws Division.
Right.
We talked about this at our Peach Orchard program, but we learn later about a letter that Longstreet writes to McLaws in 1872, in which he tells McLaws, evidently for the first time, that Robert E. Lee wanted him fired. He wanted McLaws out. He felt McLaws jeopardized the rear of his flank in failing to properly attack Sedgwick's corps at the Battle of Chancellorsville.
Okay.
And that he gave McLaws orders, and McLaws kind of fumbled, and Lee lost a lot of confidence. And this was a scary moment for Lee because his army is still separated. Jackson's corps, now under the command of Jeb Stuart, is still separated from Lee's main force, and he's got Sedgwick's large corps coming up behind him. It's a scary moment. Jubal Early kind of saves the day by coming in from the south, and Sedgwick also kind of fumbles the ball and moves back up to the river crossings instead of being aggressive. Hooker blames Sedgwick for everything afterward, by the way, at Chancellorsville.
Yeah.
And so Lee, nevertheless, for Lee, this is a tense moment. It works out fine, but no thanks to Lafayette McLaws.
Right.
Now, remember, Longstreet, you already mentioned it, Longstreet with Pickett and Hood's divisions are down in the Suffolk area chasing away whatever Yankees are down there and trying to forage and establish a supply system. So they're not there. McLaws is the division leaves behind. So Longstreet comes back, joins the Army, rejoins the Army. McLaws is with him, and he's none the wiser of this. Lee's not one who runs around and talks to people about things he doesn't like. He doesn't do that. He doesn't disparage other people.
Right.
But before the battle, in the march into Pennsylvania, he will tell Longstreet he wants McLaws out. I want him gone. And Longstreet uses his personal influence with Lee to say, I'd rather you think about that. Let's leave it up to McLaws whether he wants to leave. Let's present him with the situation. Say the boss is kind of unhappy. Maybe not the word we would use.
Right.
And maybe you should find assignment elsewhere. But if you choose, you can stay. And Lee says, all right. He backs up and he goes, all right. But let me tell you something, Pete. You are in charge of McLaws' division.
Okay.
You are in charge of the movement of his brigades. I don't want to hear anything about McLaws pulling off another Chancellorsville. I mean, I'm sure he didn't say that literally.
Right,
but maybe he did.
Yeah.
We don't. It's not written down, so we don't know. But he said to him, no uncertain terms, I'm holding you responsible for everything that McLaws is supposed to do. And we will see that on July 2nd. He literally leads 3 of the 4 brigades into action.
Mm-hmm.
And Semmes is following Kershaw because their sister regiment, like you pointed out already, Semmes takes over Thomas Cobb's brigade, so they're sort of been joined at the hip as it is.
Right.
So Kershaw doesn't need to concern himself with Semmes. He sends orders back to Semmes, this is what I need you to do. Semmes comes up and does it.
Right.
But Longstreet will personally release Barksdale to make his attack, and more importantly, hold him back when he doesn't want him to attack yet. He follows Wofford all the way down into the Beaver Valley, the Plum Run Valley. Where they are finally stopped by a brigade of troops. I can't remember who charged down that slope. They're insignificant soldiers. They would stop Wofford's attack. We're saying that for Eric's benefit.
Is that the reserves?
And Ralph
wants to fight. Apparently.
Was that Eric? I'm sorry.
Ralph wants to fight. Apparently,
no more cigarettes for Ralph.
Yeah.
And
you can't bum.
Longstreet is literally. And McLaws is furious. He writes the letter home. He's deceitful. He's a humbug, and all that crap. We used to be friends. Now I hate his guts. And this is what he explains in that letter. We have to look at that. So why is Longstreet going out to the Emmitsburg Road? Because he can't see what's going on.
Okay, so he wants to see. Yeah.
So he goes out to the Rose Lane. Mm-hmm. Now, Eric, I sent you some pictures. I sent you a picture of the Irish Brigade Monument. And I sent you a picture that I forget. I think I called it just Stony Hill. There, look at that picture. That pond is the low swampy ground of the Rose Farm. At the time this photograph is made, they dammed it to get an agricultural pond for irrigation purposes or for livestock, whatever.
What is? I have a quick question for you about the Stony Hill. During the battle, was it denuded of trees?
That's the point of this photograph. Look at those monuments up there. You could see them all clearly.
Very clearly. So the how wooded it is today is not accurate to 1860s. What year is this picture taken?
Yeah, 80s.
The 1980s.
No, 1880s.
Oh, 1880s. Okay.
Yeah. So this would be like...
This is at the dedication of the monuments.
Yeah, but like the perspective.
This is from the Rose Farm.
And de Trobriand Avenue would be like...
Behind
them.
You can't, it's behind them.
Okay.
Yeah. You're looking toward the east.
Your left.
The peach orchard is your rear left. You're basically looking from the Rose Farm lane a little bit west of the Rose Farm itself.
Yeah. So this is all swampy now, the pond
now
here.
It's the dam's not there anymore, so now that's a wetland that bleeds all the way into the Rose Woods.
Right.
And it's marshy on any rainy day. But the point is, look at those monuments out in the open. Look at how open Stony Hill is.
And a lot more significant looking without the trees.
Yeah.
Right? It looks...
Now there's another picture, Irish Brigade. that I just recently saw for the first time, thanks to Mike Warricher.
Wow.
I stole this from him. So here's the famous Irish Brigade Monument. You see no road yet.
No.
But look through it, how open it is.
It's incredibly open.
Yeah. That's much as we love the Irish Brigade Monument, my purpose in having this is so you can see how open the hill is behind it.
What year is this from?
That's in the 1880s also.
Oh, so the 1880s, okay.
Maybe 1890s.
No, that's
Wow.
definitely 1880. The 116th PA monument's not up.
There he goes. Look at that.
Oh, wow, Eric. Look at you,
Either it's not up
detective.
Or we can't see it. But, yeah. So,
Wait,
look how open the Stony Hill is at that time. So when...
Wait, hold on a second. What monument did you say, Eric? 116th PA?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the dead
That should
soldier
be,
lying on the top.
like,
But
you
that's
can
up on
see
the
the-
hill behind it,
No,
isn't
it
it?
should
You
be
can
right
see the
across the street from
28th
28th.
Mass, right?
Yeah.
It's directly across the street from. You should be able to see it.
Yeah.
Plain as day.
So wait, where's the road today? Is it?
It's running over that guy.
It's running over the guy. Okay.
In fact, he's probably sketching out the road.
And then it goes up and
Right.
like this.
I think you can see a little bit of road grade if you look at the Wolfhound
Yes.
and you look just to the right of
It
that.
does look
there's
like a road
s-
grade, yeah.
like a flat line.
Yes, I see it where there's a flank marker.
I think if you follow that direction and you get almost to the right edge of the photo,
Yes.
you can see what kind of looks like maybe
A road.
a bit of like dirt road there.
Yeah.
I suspect
Now,
that
wait.
might be the original
Loop. The original loop.
Yeah.
Because the road that we know today didn't go through here originally, correct?
Well, the road today would run over that guy and then make
Yeah.
a severe left turn and go off the photo and then come back.
Yeah, but I'm saying that at the time
Yeah.
there was the loop. Like there was actually a loop in the road. Have you ever seen I saw an old aerial photo and the road didn't go the way it goes today.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's an actual loop.
All right.
And if you would come off of Wheatfield Road
Yeah.
and go around the loop and then go back out. So the road next to the Irish Brigade Monument wasn't there.
Now, and we're looking, the idea of the photograph is to show how open it is back
Yes,
there.
yes.
And
But in typical
You know.
Addressing Gettysburg fashion, we went on a tangent.
well, that's perfectly fine. So now the orders still remain. Attack up the Emmitsburg Road.
Yes.
Longstreet doesn't know what's going on with Hood's division.
Right.
I mean, Tom Berenger seems to know.
Well, Tom Berenger
Because
is
he
very
wrote out
smart.
and talked to Patrick Gorman and said, can we go around the ride?
Right.
I said, no. I have two divisions. You can't separate them by miles.
Right.
And if you go around behind Big Round Top, you know what you're going to find. And by the time you get into action, it'll be dark.
Forget it.
So, no, you're not going off on your own. Stop asking me.
Uh-huh.
And by the way, aren't you a little old to be playing a 32-year-old general? But never mind that.
She's like 20 years older.
Yeah. But he's a nice guy. Pat.
He's a great guy.
Yeah. All right, you had him on your thing.
He's a very good friend
Right,
of
very
ours.
nice man.
Yeah.
So the idea is to attack up the Emmitsburg Road.
Right.
And he doesn't know what's going on with Hood. I mean, he obviously went over there to look at what was happening, but now he doesn't know what's happened. He just sees gun smoke rising, and he hears volley fire, and there's screaming, and the Devil's Den is just a big brawl. We give it artificial organization.
Right.
By the way, we look,
yeah.
okay, this regiment's here, this regiment's there, and they're all over the, Anderson's brigade is reasonably intact, I think. But there's just,
Law's Brigade's all messed up.
Law's brigade is dividing by itself because they're up in the woods, and they're not sure where they're supposed to go, and half his brigade will hit the Devil's Den from the back.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a mess down there, and I believe it's plausible that it's not written. Here's a book I brought with me. You can show it to the camera. Should be on topic.
Here, I'll
The
hold it
history of Kershaw's brigade. Look at that.
up. There you go. Look at that. Wow.
Nothing in there about this. Nothing mentioned. So people have to follow me on a flight of faith.
D. Augustus Dickert
Yes,
is the author's name.
He's an officer in the brigade.
It's a great
A lot
name.
of great detail. No mention of this.
Okay.
So clearly, Hood is not coming up the Emmitsburg Road. But beyond that, he doesn't know what's going on.
Okay.
We don't have that written down. He doesn't give us that in his official report. This is my interpretation, my inference from the battlefield knowledge, is that neither of them know what Stony Hill is. They got to get over the Emmitsburg Road to see what's going on. Why is Longstreet on foot going with Kershaw's brigade, all of them on foot, to avoid artillery fire?
Yeah.
No flags open. This is not a charge. We're basically getting across this field to the Emmitsburg Road. Everybody kneel down or lie down, and then we'll figure out what we're doing.
Okay.
7th South Carolina, the color bearer is Alfred Clark.
Is he the one that...
He says out loud before checking to make sure he's right. Yes, Alfred Clark is the color bearer of the 7th South Carolina, which is essentially in the center. And word gets passed not to unfurl the flags.
Mm-hmm.
Just get across the road, keep the flags rolled up. We'll form our battle formations when we get out there. Alfred Clark either feels that's beneath his dignity or he didn't get the word. So he unfurls the flag of the 7th South Carolina as they begin crossing that field from the Warfield Ridge to the Emmitsburg Road. The Union batteries in the Peach Orchard open fire on the flag, and 5 men go down, 2 dead, 3 wounded, including Clark. To which somebody had to run over and yell, "I told you not to unfurl the flag." But at any rate.
Well, there's another story. I think this is the 3rd South Carolina. This is from the brigades at Gettysburg. During the action, the 3rd South Carolina's flag was attracting hot fire. 4 color guards had already been shot down, causing the men near the flag to yell, "Lower the colors down the flag." The color bearer, in an act of defiance against his own comrades, waved the flag even more forcefully and yelled out, "This flag never goes down until I am down."
No.
The flag did not go down this day. So he got to keep the flag and didn't die, apparently. Good for him.
That's a bit later.
Yes.
Here we're just trying to get up to the Emmitsburg Road.
Right. Sorry, I jumped ahead.
We charge up to the... charge up to the Emmitsburg Road. We get up to the Emmitsburg Road. And now James Longstreet, Corps commander of this attack.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Lee sent him on his way. This is his corps. This is his attack. And he gets to see what is happening for the first time.
Right.
The Trobriand's brigade is, the 3rd Corps brigade is in the middle of a massive fight. And the first corps to come into the rescue, the reserves that were in the center of Meade's position. Fishhook, I prefer Horseshoe. He had his own 5th Corps that he was a commander of up until 4 days ago. His own 5th Corps is in the reserve center. They can move him to Culp's Hill, move him to Cemetery Hill, move him where he needs. Now he moves them left. He moves them to the leftern end where they're marching into the wheat field. And the 5th Corps, as you know, is made up of 2 divisions. James Barnes with Tilton's brigade, Schweitzer's brigade, and then the famous Strong Vincent's brigade, 3rd Brigade. And next brigade is United States Army Regulars, Romaine B. Ayres, with 2 regular brigades, regular U.S. Army, and then Stephen Weed's brigade, which will reinforce Vincent on Little Round Top.
Right.
And then there's another division that we just don't pay attention to. I can't remember who they are because they're insignificant.
Eric, do you know?
They're in the back. I'm sure Eric knows who they are.
That's about par for the course, though.
We don't talk about them. And
well, maybe one of the listeners can write in and tell us what brigade that is.
Wheatfield is a messy fight, but essentially, to make it overly painfully simple, the troops in there from the 3rd Corps are running out of ammunition. So it's not like it's a full-blown rout.
Okay.
It's like we're falling back because we're getting hit by a superior force, but we're like about out of bullets here.
Yeah.
And so the 5th Corps is in, and Barnes, well, I don't want to say Barnes himself because he doesn't get a lot of credit for doing much of anything in this attack. Schweitzer and Tilton, which are two severely undersized brigades.
Very small.
Brigade is smaller than the 26th North Carolina Regiment.
Yeah.
600 men, 1,200 men. They're crossing along, I don't know if the woods really have a name, but the woods that are on the western edge of the wheat field, headed toward the Stony Hill.
Yeah.
When they come upon the Stony Hill, they're crossing across the open ground with their biggest regiment on their right, 118th Pennsylvania, the Corn Exchange.
Yes.
They're on the right. Longstreet sees this. He doesn't know how big that force is because you can't,
Right.
you know,
tell.
count.
Right.
But it is almost 2,000 men. It can look like 5,000, whatever, and they're going right at the flank of the 9th Georgia. If they move across the Stony Hill, the position of the 9th Georgia moving toward the wheat field, they could move right into their flank. They could roll up Anderson's brigade, pile them into the 8th Georgia, because nothing like getting hit in the flank. There's one thing worse than getting hit in the flank, getting hit in the flank in the woods. And he can push them right back. And then guess what? If he breaks through the Rose Woods, he's in the rear of the Texans on the Devil's Den.
Right.
This could be a catastrophe. Mm-hmm. The orders are to march up the Emmitsburg Road. That's the orders. That's the paper plan. James Longstreet, in my interpretation of events, in my solo flight, which maybe some listeners will join me on, they have on tours, and they don't seem to. They let me back on the bus when we're done, and they do applaud politely. So I don't know if I've won disciples to my point of view, but Eric clearly is unimpressed because I insulted the reserve again. Longstreet's boys are getting chewed up.
Yeah.
We all know, in retrospect, that the wheat field and the triangular field and those areas, that triangular field is the apron of stone and thorns leading up to the Devil's Den. These are meat grinders. My boys are getting chewed up in there. And my first responsibility is to reinforce them. And so the center regiments in Kershaw's brigade hit the flank of those 5th Corps guys crossing the Stony Hill. They go right at them and drive them back.
Okay.
Because if they don't, they're going to gain the flank of Anderson's brigade. They're going to gain the flank of the 9th Georgia and start rolling up Hood's entire division from the side. It's obvious Hood is having a lot more trouble in his front than was expected.
Right.
And now for what may be a division-sized force to hit him in the flank, he can't allow it.
Right, okay.
I know we're supposed to go up the Peach Orchard. We're supposed to hit the Peach Orchard, and that's where he devised the brigade. And I do not believe that Kershaw did that on his own authority, even though he says he did in all his reports. I think Longstreet.
So you think Longstreet said you got to take care of that
The
over
Corps
there.
commander is at your elbow.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a command decision that affects the rest of the war. No, I don't think so. I think Longstreet is there, but he never writes it down because Longstreet doesn't write anything down.
Right.
His description of July 2nd, in my estimation, you know, I'm biased on this, the most important day of the war. Longstreet writes about it with like 80 words.
Yeah. Well,
He just doesn't explain his role. He doesn't explain that he came to the Emmitsburg Road. He doesn't explain that he's doing this. And on that square foot of dirt on the Rose Farm, he orders Kershaw to throw two of his biggest 900 guys, two big regiments, into the Stony Hill. Take your other wing and attack the Peach Orchard, where they're repulsed by two brigades and two artillery batteries that cut them to shreds. The Peach Orchard, really, the front is not that wide, so the 8th South Carolina and James Battalion are hitting the 141st Pennsylvania, the skirmishers of the 3rd Maine, and the big 2nd New Hampshire.
Right.
And the 2nd New Hampshire goes after them.
So now...
But the 2nd New Hampshire, or the 2nd South Carolina, they're actually attacking the Wheatfield Road.
Right.
And they're the ones that are moving against Freeman McGilvery's two batteries that are straddling the road. 12 cannon, 6 Napoleon, 6 rifles that are plowing these guys to pieces with canister.
Right.
New Jersey battery, which is at the point of the peach orchard, is firing canister in all directions, and they don't explain. I think they probably leaned in because once the New Hampshire boys are pushing the 8th South Carolina back down the slope toward the headwaters of Plum Run, they can't keep shooting canister. They're going to be hitting them.
Right.
But they say they keep shooting. I think they just swing their barrels left and start shooting at 2nd South Carolina.
Okay.
And although this is the risk of me getting thrown out of the building before the program's over, those are the harvest of death photos. Sorry.
Oh, boy.
But there's certainly a lot of dead guys over there and a lot of photographs. If they are the harvest picture, it's... But Gardner certainly took a lot of pictures of dead Confederates because that's the last place you can bury them because it's so rocky.
Right.
7th South Carolina is crowding the 3rd. Everybody wants to attack the Stony Hill, but Stony Hill is 1 point. They're hitting the 118th Corn Exchange Regiment, the 118th Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And they're crowding each other, so orders go up. But this is the chaos of battle. Who gave the orders? Never documented. I mean, Kershaw gave the order, but who transmitted the order and who screwed it up? Because moved by the right flank to uncover the 3rd transmits to all the regiments, and that's where the 2nd South Carolina stops and starts moving to the right flank.
Okay.
The order wasn't meant for them. It was meant for the 7th South Carolina to give more room to the 3rd South Carolina hitting Stony Hill.
Got it. Okay.
But the order gets to the 2nd, and that's when they stop. The artillerymen were stunned.
Well, wasn't the 2nd and the 7th, or two of them? I don't remember which ones.
3rd and the 7th are hitting Stony Hill.
But aren't they kind of overlapping with each other? They're kind of getting...
They're the ones overlapping, 3 and 7.
Okay.
2nd, there's no room for them to hit the peach orchard. The 8th and the James Battalion are doing that. 2nd's right next to James Battalion, but they're actually going right at the Wheatfield Road.
Okay.
With no cover in front of them.
Okay.
Now, the ground slopes down and up because some of the gunners will say they came out of the earth.
Right.
But they lay into them.
Yeah.
When they turn to the right flank and start moving toward the woods, McGilvery's crews who were ready to limber up and get out of there because they thought these guys were going to overrun us, re-engage, reload, and start throwing canister. And it's
amazing they only had 650 casualties. Although you say you have higher numbers.
Yeah.
For casualties.
Well, the 2nd South Carolina got chewed to pieces. Kershaw himself, a raking fire of grape and canister rendered it difficult to retain the line in good order. The canister clattered against the side of the barn like hailstones.
Jesus. Could you imagine? I would love to have seen that barn.
Captain William Johnson, 2nd South Carolina. Shells are cutting off arms, legs, and heads of our men, cutting them in two and exploding in their bodies, tearing them into mincemeat. So it's not just canister fire. They're firing everything, including exploding shells. John Cox of the 2nd South Carolina. Oh, the awful, deathly surging sounds of those little black balls as they flew by us, through us, between our legs and over us. Many, of course, were struck down.
Yeah.
Second in command of the 2nd South Carolina, Lieutenant Colonel Franklin Gaillard, who's sort of in command because John Kennedy's in command of the wing.
Okay.
Gaillard, we are in 10 minutes or less terribly butchered. I saw half a dozen at a time knocked up and flung to the ground like trifles. There were familiar forces and faces with parts of their heads shot away, our legs shattered, arms torn off. In about that short space of time, we had half our men killed and wounded. It's the most shocking battle I have ever witnessed.
That's the one I was looking for. Yeah,
it's just, and so this is the way they were supposed to attack, and the attack was undersized.
Okay.
If Kershaw's entire brigade had made that attack, it's speculation.
Made the attack on the batteries or on Stony Hill?
The whole Peach Orchard and the Wheatfield Road.
Okay.
These regiments would have been backed up by the 3rd and 7th.
Right.
Instead, the 3rd and 7th is going to fight its own battle and capture Stony Hill and drive off Schweitzer's brigade, Tilton's brigade. Well, the 118th held, but Tilton's brigade pretty much just shot across the street because James Barnes was like, I not really know what we're doing over here, and I don't want my boys getting wiped out.
Right.
There's a command and control problem, which I think is evident of the fact that they have a new corps commander who doesn't really have a hand on the controls. George Sykes is, Strong Vincent is holding in the gap between Munshauer Hill and Little Round Top, and he sees a courier coming down from Little Round Top sent by General Warren, Governor Warren at the top by himself, and he intercepts the courier. What are your orders? Well, I'm looking for General Barnes. Oh, just tell me what the orders are. Well, we got to get guys up there. And he redeploys his 4 regiments to the south side of Little Round Top, and like with 5 minutes to spare.
Yeah.
So, command is a little like, where is everybody?
It's an emergency situation.
Except for the spectacularly well-read Pennsylvania reserves, who Crawford, McCandless, and Fisher have a grip on their men and use them magnificently.
Of course.
Throughout the campaign, saving north slope of Little Round Top.
Ralph
But
must
that's
want a
later.
cigarette.
Yeah, but he wants a cigarette during the break.
My wife's going to listen to this.
Oh, sorry.
And I'm going to be in so much trouble.
No.
They're just kidding about the cigarette.
Yeah, no. He watches Eric smoke it, and he goes, "Oh, that smells so good. It makes me miss it, but I don't want to start again."
Well, okay. We'll see if that one launches.
Ralph does not smoke.
He does not. We
So
just
with
tease him.
that decision to attack the Stony Hill, which to me is completely understandable.
Yeah, because that would make you
Cemetery
meet up
Hill.
with.
Cemetery Hill vanishes. Kershaw can't make the turn. The only brigade that makes the turn up the Emmitsburg Road is the next to attack, Barksdale's brigade.
Yes,
And
then Kershaw doesn't have anything nice to say about him doing that.
Well,
though.
because this is Kershaw. Kershaw's pretending he's a little bit a division commander.
Right. But
Barksdale was supposed to come in with me on my flank.
Right.
Says who?
Right.
Longstreet is holding Barksdale back personally.
Right.
Because he is looking for an N echelon, which is overused, by the way.
Yes.
There's not that much N echelon fighting on July 2nd.
No. That was
Most
the attempt.
Most of it occurs in history books written afterward.
Okay.
When they talk about N echelon.
So they've analyzed it and say this is what it looks
an
like.
echelon means something specific. An echelon is when you hit with one force to divert the enemy from their defensive position, and then you hit with another force to exploit the movement.
Yes.
This is classic what happens there. Kershaw has pulled all the regiments facing south to deal with his attack, or Kennedy's attack. And they're all facing the wrong way when Barksdale launches his attack. So they have to get, the 2nd New Hampshire will make a unique rear, very complicated by the company's about face, swing to the right, and about face again to get themselves facing toward the west where Barksdale's coming.
Okay.
And there just aren't enough regiments up there. People will talk about how Barksdale smashed through the Union lines that they didn't hold. The Union line at the Sherfy Farm and the Union line at the Peach Orchard are holding. Those regiments are holding.
Yeah.
The problem is 2 of Barksdale's regiments are going to a space between them where there's only one small regiment that's falling back.
Okay.
So that's how the line collapses. The New Hampshire men fighting in the Peach Orchard will say, we fell back because the regiment to our right went off.
Right.
There's a lot of that in the official records. It's always somebody else. But in this case, it is, the 68th was shot out, was out of ammunition. We always have to keep that in mind. Under a fierce, heavy fire, these regiments are good for 20 minutes.
Yeah. And that's what, 60 rounds?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you are in a stand-up heavy shooting match, in 20 minutes, you got to get relieved.
Sure.
Which is the doctrine of Longstreet's attacks of the brigade behind the brigade.
Right. Okay, so now so Kershaw goes in, he splits up, goes straight ahead,
and he
goes to
captures
his
the
left.
Stony Hill.
And then where Semmes is behind him.
He calls Semmes to come up with him. It's his support, and Semmes will hit the Rose Farm Ridge, for lack of a better term, at the top of the Rose Woods from the right. So he's hitting
to his right.
Right. He's hitting where Brooks' brigade would go up.
So should Kershaw have focused more on Rose's Woods and Stony Hill to connect with Hood?
He's attacking with 2 regiments. He's attacking the troops that are in front of him, and he stops them. So that's a successful attack.
Right. So he's clearing the way.
Yes.
In a way.
Well, no, he's stopping them. They're moving left to right across the Stony Hill.
Right. Got it.
And if they keep going, they're going to get Anderson in the flank. Anderson probably doesn't even see them.
Understood. I see what you're saying. Okay.
There's woods there, and Anderson's brigade probably doesn't even know the peril that they are in.
No, I'm sure they
Plus,
don't.
the commander of the 8th Georgia is down. 9th Georgia. The commander of the 8th Georgia is down. The commander of the brigade would be wounded, but I'm not entirely sure when. So there's already a command structure problem, like who's looking out for our flanks.
Mm-hmm.
Captain George Hillier is trying to just keep his regiment together and moving forward. This is, sudden command change, and captain commanding the regiment.
Yeah.
And, there's a whole 2 brigades coming in on your left flank, but he can't see them because of the shape of the ground. The Stony Hill obscures that view, the physical hill. You have a little gap between the Rosewoods and the hill that they're going to cross. And Kershaw, they don't get there because Kershaw hits them so hard and drives them back. And Kershaw will take the entire Stony Hill until 2nd Corps, Union Corps, arrives. And the Irish Brigade will hit them with Zook's brigade coming in on the flank and drives Kershaw all the way back up to the Rose Farm.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, when that attack is diverted, in my view, Cemetery Hill becomes impossible.
Oh, yeah.
Robert E. Lee himself will give orders to Cadmus Wilcox. I want you to go that way, not that way.
Meaning?
I want you to go across here to the Emmitsburg Road and toward the Union flank. Don't go after all that stuff Longstreet's in the middle of.
Right.
He wanted, as modern military officers would say, the energy of the attack was going in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
And Lee wanted to salvage some of the attack going in the correct direction.
Sure.
As it turns out, Wilcox and Barksdale kind of almost crash into each other.
Yep.
And so Barksdale will make a right turn along with Wilcox, and they're heading for Cemetery Ridge. So they roll up the Union flank. You hit the guys that you're hitting, and you follow them.
Yeah.
And so the Union is sort of drawing those attacks towards Cemetery Ridge. No one gets near Cemetery Hill.
No plan survives contact with the enemy.
Well, and this one, went really to pieces.
Yeah.
And so Cemetery Hill evaporated, and with that, in my view, any chance to win the war.
So the spot, because we're titling this episode. What is the title of this episode? It's very long.
Yeah.
It's Kershaw's Brigade and the spot where the South lost the war. The spot would be.
It's right under the tree, so you're in the shade. Of course, we have no idea.
We don't know
where Longstreet was standing.
Right.
When he got across the Emmitsburg Road and looked at what was happening on Stony Hill and said, "Holy," and Kershaw would have us believe that he took the initiative on this.
Right.
There's no single piece of paper that I've ever found where someone says Longstreet told Kershaw to do that. I just find it implausible that a brigade commander, as esteemed as Kershaw may have been, standing in front of a lieutenant general, commander of the Corps, second ranking in the Army to Robert E. Lee, General Longstreet, what do you think I should do? But I cannot. I just consider that. And the reason I do is because Kershaw writes so much, including his official report, which I, accepted for years and years and years. It's that battlefield tramping, going over the terrain again and again, and suddenly thinking, how does he know where the Stony Hill is?
Yeah.
He intended to attack the Stony Hill?
No, he had to.
I think the intention was to go up the Emmitsburg Road.
But
he's reporting what he did,
right?
Rather than what he was, what he thought the orders might have done,
right?
And even Barksdale only gets a quarter or third of a mile up the Emmitsburg Road before he ends up turning towards Cemetery Ridge.
Yeah,
and Wilcox is following his orders and support the First Corps brigades that are coming up the road. So that's what he's doing. He's going in supporting Barksdale.
It's a battle, and battles are messes.
And the result is that the objective, which may not have been clear enough, vanishes behind the gun smoke.
Mm-hmm.
Dorsey Pender's brigade division never moves, and Pender himself floating around on horseback trying to figure out what's going on in all the smoke. An artillery shell cuts shrapnel into his leg, and it ends up to be a mortal wound.
It's so weird. Like, it seems that everybody in command in the Army of Northern Virginia here was drunk or just got hit in the head with something.
I don't know if I'd say everybody was drunk.
No, I'm not saying. It seems like they were. There's a lot of weird decisions and or lack of cohesion.
Command falls apart easy.
Yeah.
Not so easy to do.
No, it's
Remember
not.
Colonel Tom Vossler was giving us a briefing on command issues during a tour, and he said, I remember we were going to take our, I forget if it was a battalion, it was an infantry group, not as large as a brigade, and we're going to take them out for a march on Saturday. We're going to get them all geared up. They're going to carry their packs, and we're going to hike over here, and then we're going to hike over there, and we're going to get back. He said, we have like 3 planning meetings for this. We got all the officers of all the regiments together, of the different companies together. Yeah. Okay, well, who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? You made the water. You're going to check these guys, and somebody's got a post at the turn, and,
Yeah. It's a lot.
It's
many moving parts.
So when command goes away,
we're
kind of improvising here.
Mm-hmm.
But on the overall character of the Army of Northern Virginia, it had adopted, I think, even before Lee, but under Lee, it clearly had adopted a military cultural philosophy of seizing and holding the initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Always hold the initiative.
Sure.
The only way the smaller guy in that dark alley is going to beat the bigger guy is by jumping into his face before the guy can take a breath.
Yeah, and not letting go.
Punch him in the face before the guy's even, taking his gloves off or whatever.
Yep.
This is the cultural attitude of the Army of Northern Virginia. Those are the officers that advance. That's the cultural beliefs that Lee prizes.
Mm-hmm.
Hit them. Don't give them a chance. We're outnumbered. We don't care. They have more equipment than us. We do not care. Go at them.
Yeah.
Most of these guys, you go at them, they're going to fall back. And so that was what they came to Gettysburg with. And they had the wrong army for that.
There's nothing scarier than a little guy coming at you.
Yeah.
When you know that you're the big guy and you're like, this guy's crazy.
Yeah. And but this was a different army.
Yeah.
Chancellorsville was like they're all walking around. What's going on? And what just happened?
Right.
And this is a Pennsylvania army with Pennsylvania commanders and a third of Pennsylvania troops.
Yeah.
We even have the immortal Pennsylvania Reserves in line.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them.
The superhuman troops with their with their steroid vitamins. The muscles bulging out all over.
Right.
Ready to charge down the field, holding onto the general's horse. That old wives' tale that what was his name? Swope, the corporal flag bearer who's Crawford took his flag.
It's not Swope.
Dope.
No. I'll remember it.
Crawford took his flag.
Yeah.
And so he grabbed Crawford's pant leg and ran down. That story's wrong.
Is it?
Yeah, the 4 reserves were carrying Crawford's horse down the hill. That's how muscle-bound they were.
Wow.
Carry me, boys. I don't want the horse to sprain an ankle.
Like one of those things the Pharaoh would be carried on, right? But it was
troops.
a horse. What is that, a sedan?
And remember, Longstreet follows Wofford's brigade all the way across the wheat field, all the way down into Beaver Valley, into Plum Run Valley, where he will then see troops coming from his left. And they're reinforcing. Yankees coming, they're coming out of the sky.
Uh-huh.
And that's where he calls off the attack against the North Slope. Much to Wofford's chagrin and many of the officers saying, come on, we got him on the run.
Right.
He says, you got him on the run. There's 4 Ohio Napoleons right in front of you. And I don't think they're running all that much.
Yeah.
And there's a big force up there, and that guy with the flag, he looks a little angry.
Yeah, they're waiting for you.
He's got something to prove.
Yeah. It's probably a good idea to call it off. Because they took a clobbering.
Right.
And
it shows Longstreet with his hands on the controls of McLaws' division.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a strong inference to be made from there that he has his hands on the controls of Kershaw's brigade.
Probably.
And
he's a hands-on
it's his
guy.
decision to direct Kershaw into the Stony Hill. And with that movement, I just stand there and I look at that hill and wish they'd open it up. But, they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
Let them fix up Little Round Top.
Yeah.
Stony Hill will come next. And but I love to stand there and just contemplate it like at the right time of day. And says, man, this was the decisive spot.
Mm-hmm.
And he made a completely human decision. And no one can see this, by the way, for like a year or more. that Gettysburg was the last chance. It wasn't immediately self-evident.
Okay.
So I excused them for not saying it, not writing it. The spot where they lost the war.
Well, all right. So now we've got some questions that our patrons sent in. Don't forget, you need to be a patron by going and signing up at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. And you can send in questions when we do these Ask a Guides. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and get to those questions. And have we got some questions for you. So we'll be right back. Bo Brinkman is no stranger to Gettysburg, filmmaking, or this audience. An established Texas filmmaker, Bo has held the lead and supporting roles in television and film, including the 1993 film Gettysburg and its prequel Gods and Generals. Bo has written, produced, and directed several films, often drawing his characters and storylines from his ensemble of intricate comical and emotional family tales. The Last Mark, The Bay House, and Last Man Club are among his collection, with the latter winning Best of Show, Best of Picture, Best of Film, Best Narrative Feature, and Best Dramatic Feature. Now, 30 years after the release of Gettysburg, Bo returns to the same town for his next film, A Gettysburg Christmas, and he is looking forward to your assistance in bringing the film to life. Just go to GoFundMe.com and search for A Gettysburg Christmas, or click the link in the show notes and choose your level of support.
You've heard us promote various ways that you can help us keep the show going, but one way we haven't pushed too much is our sutlery at addressinggettysburg.com/shop. That's a shame because we have designs over there by talented artists like Ty DeWitt of 1863 Designs and Mike Stretch of the Heritage Depot. So now we're promoting it. Buying shirts, hoodies, mugs, and other items from our sutlery not only helps us keep the lights on, but it also helps guys like Ty and Mike, and it helps spread the word about the show every time you wear an item or you sip from your mug. So head over to addressinggettysburg.com/shop and grab some merch. It's the perfect Christmas gift for the Gettys nerd in your family. That's addressinggettysburg.com/shop.
Our favorite bookstore in Gettysburg is For the Historian, located at 42 York Street. It's because they have the best selection of Civil War books in Gettysburg, both new and used. And online, they have even more to choose from. And if the Civil War isn't your thing, that's not a problem. This is For the Historian, after all. They cover history from the ancient world to the 21st century with a strong selection of World War II and American Revolution books. And it's astounding how many thousands of titles from Osprey, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more they have in their store. And that's because, well, they have a warehouse too. And that's where they keep all the books that are available online at forthehistorian.com. And folks, if you go to forthehistorian.com now and order books until you're blue in the face, be sure you mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund your shipping costs. And if you prefer to stop by when you're in town, well, you could do that too. Just mention Addressing Gettysburg at checkout, and they'll take 20% off the retail price of your item. So go to forthehistorian.com or stop by 42 York Street, or you can call them at 717-685-5207. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207.
Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum, is housed in the historic Lutheran Seminary building constructed in 1832, a witness to the first day of battle. The museum's 3 floors of exhibits connect visitors to the dilemmas that led to the Civil War, provide a powerful and personal view of the battle's first day, and explore one of the battlefield's largest hospitals. No visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center is complete without a guided tour of the building's famous cupola, where on the eve of battle, officers and civilians saw thousands of Confederate soldiers' campfires burning to the west, and Brigadier General John Buford watched for vital federal reinforcements as fighting erupted on the morning of July 1st. Today, you can stand where Buford stood and discover how this view helped chart the course of the Battle of Gettysburg. Your trip to Gettysburg is not complete without a serious visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum. Purchase tickets online at seminaryridgemuseum.org or call 717-339-1300. To get tickets or a cupola tour, listeners may call or walk in and mention Addressing Gettysburg, or by ordering online using the promo code AG1863 for 20% off. Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center. It began here.
There's a devil to pay.
Hey, Gettysburg business owners. Winter is just around the bend, and you know what that means. No tourists. But just because people aren't coming to you doesn't mean you can't bring your business to them. If you ship, you're still in the game. And if you're a seasonal business, the time to advertise for your next season is in the off-season when people are making their plans. So what's an affordable yet highly effective way of reaching those people? Well, it's not radio, it's not TV, and it's certainly not print. Step out of the Jurassic era of advertising and run an ad on Addressing Gettysburg. We just reached 1 million downloads, and we're growing by the tens of thousands every month. Beyond that, our audience is happy to support those who support their favorite podcast. So email sales@Addressing Gettysburg for more information about advertising on our show. We look forward to helping your business grow. That's sales@AddressingGettysburg.com.
You're listening to the Addressing Gettysburg podcast with Matt Callery.
Okay, we are back. Thank you, Sam Elliott. And we've got questions for Ralph Siegel here. These questions are submitted by some of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Addressing Gettysburg. If you'd like to submit questions for our guides to answer, you got to get to get exclusive content, that takes a closer look at things all Gettysburg and Gettysburg related. Please consider joining us on Patreon today. That's patreon.com/Addressing Gettysburg. Ralph has a couple of quotes he wants to read before we get to the questions, though. Go ahead, Ralph.
To put the ORs into some of that context, we all have the ORs, and
yes, we do.
We relish the volumes, and we make sure they're not dusty, and we take good care of them and keep them away from the dog.
Because they're expensive.
Yes, but let me put some of this into the context of how can you question things like Kershaw's report and so forth. Harper's Ferry retired historian Dennis Fry is become something of a guru to me. All history is opinion. This is the error that we have, that we accept history as a fact. Those who participate have memories, and memory by definition is flawed because memory represents a lapse in time. As time passes, things change. All of us have our memories, that's good, but those memories are not facts. Captain John Batchelor of the 149th PA will send a letter to John Batchelder about the project that Batchelder is undertaking, collecting these letters and interviews from hundreds and hundreds of sources. What a Herculean task you have to separate the truth from the falsehood in the multitude of reports that have rained down on you since 1860. And then finally, one of my favorite philosophers, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on your own point of view. And that is the great philosopher Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Very good. Our first questioner is Stephen Lunsford. He's got two questions. One, do you have any stories, vignettes on any of the regimental commanders of Kershaw's brigade that were killed and mortally wounded at Gettysburg?
In Kershaw's brigade, well, not that leap to mind. I'd have to plow through the notes, which would take a lot of time. Most of his brigade, most of his regimental commanders were killed and wounded. Kershaw himself goes on to become division commander.
After Gettysburg,
yes,
though.
As I'm saying that,
You're stalling as you
I'm stalling as I look
turn
through my
the pages
notes to see if I've got something.
any that just come to mind, like, any particular death circumstance of a colonel or a regimental commander?
That's because I'm looking through the wrong set of notes.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Do you want to move on to the next question and then come back to that one?
Yeah, well, wait a minute. I'm looking at the right notes here.
Okay. Eric, what do you think in the meantime? What do you think of the shade that Ralph was throwing at the reserves?
I don't appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like he said that just to piss you off.
Wyatt Aiken of the 7th South Carolina will give us this comment. During my experience, I've never seen so much damage done both parties in so short a space of time. This is 7th South Carolina, which hit the Stony Hill. I had 18 men killed, several mortally wounded, and about 100 more wounded. Several mortally wounded and about 100 more wounded but survived. 16 of my men have lost arms or legs. It's a heavy carnage that will take place. There were two brothers that I was looking for who were both medical doctors and captains in two different regiments who were both killed. but I'm not finding it in my notes right now. Sorry, you've caught me off guard.
All right, sorry about that. Kershaw's brigade included the 3rd South Carolina and the 3rd South Carolina Battalion. When researching Kershaw's brigade and accounts, it can get confusing differentiating between these two units, as they can both be referred to as 3rd South Carolina. Are there any unique differences between them? What are some of the recommended sources / histories that clarify the two units? So we kind of touched on that before.
The 3rd South Carolina Battalion is colloquially referred to by the men as the James Battalion. The battalion was formed by George Strother James, a major in the original Palmetto Battalion. He was a sergeant major in the 1st regiments at the age of 19. A U.S. Army artillery officer resigns to become the commander of artillery. He's actually the one who ordered the firing of the first shots at Fort Sumter. He will gather 4 companies at Columbia, the state capital, which had been somewhat evacuated because of a disease outbreak. So his 4 companies were not enough to form an entire regiment, but because of James's stature, they didn't want to just fold it into another regiment, and therefore it became the James Battalion.
Okay. There you go. Chaplain Cox says, thanks for doing this. I've had this nagging question about Kershaw that I haven't quite figured out. His regiments fought disparate engagements on July 2nd. The 8th and 2nd at the Peach Orchard, the 7th and 3rd at the Loop, and the 15th at the Rose Farm. Where was Kershaw located during this, and when was he finally able to bring his brigade back together to fight as a brigade, or did he ever fight his brigade as a unit again? Thanks.
He wasn't able to bring it back together. The 15th South Carolina was at the far right end because they were protecting the right flank of the artillery. Henry Coulter Cabell's 14 guns.
Okay.
And so they wanted to have a regiment far out on their right flank. So when the attack occurred, William disarray, I pronounce his name, actually joins in Semmes' brigade. So Kershaw himself was leading the attack of the 3rd and the 7th into the Stony Hill. When Kennedy's wing, the 2nd and 8th South Carolina and the James Battalion, were repulsed from the Peach Orchard to Wheatfield Road, they basically stayed back in the hollow behind the Rose Farm Lane. Mm-hmm. When Wofford's brigade comes marching through the Peach Orchard headed for the Wheatfield, they joined the right flank of Wofford's brigade. So Wofford's brigade kind of became a super brigade in terms of he had his own regiments plus Kennedy's wing, the ones that were still walking. And when they advanced into the Wheatfield and crossed the Wheatfield, Kershaw kind of joined them also. But it's hard to say that that's a reunification of the whole brigade. The brigade broke into 3 pieces and was never really significantly reunified.
Okay. Philip Hamby says, did Kershaw or Colonel Kennedy order the move by the right flank that exposed the left wing to the merciless cannon fire?
We did cover this. It was a mistake. The order went from Kershaw to the 7th South Carolina, moved by the right flank because they were crowding the 3rd. Mm-hmm. They're 2 regiments, pretty large regiments, and they're moving against one regiment, the 118th Pennsylvania, up on the Stony Hill, and they're moving into each other. And so the order is move off to the right. The 7th sort of went into the gap to the right of the Stony Hill. And that's where Semmes would actually go, and that's where Semmes is mortally wounded, coming in later. And so that order somehow got transmitted up the line. It was not meant for the 2nd South Carolina, but they got it, moved by the right flank.
Okay.
And it made some sense to them because they moved into those woods. Unfortunately, by stopping in the middle of the field, they exposed themselves to dreadful artillery fire. But they moved quite quickly, I think, to their right to get into the woods to get away from that artillery fire. So they would occupy those woods sort of to the left of the 3rd South Carolina. And then they would be swept out when Zook's 2nd Corps Brigade attacks from that direction.
All right, makes sense. Nicholas, what is that? Afalter or Afalter? How would you pronounce that?
Afalter.
Afalter. Sorry, Nicholas. This is a new name by me. So, the gunfight at the Peach Orchard is by far one of my favorite episodes, and I have listened to it frequently this year. All right, so you got a fan here, Ralph. Thank you for all the fresh perspectives. My questions are in regards to the echelon attack. 1, set the record straight. Was the attack planned to unfold this way, or was Longstreet reacting to the flow of battle as action progressed from left to right?
Yeah, he's definitely reacting to the flow of battle as it flowed from his perspective right to left.
Right.
Yeah, Hood's division went in a way that was not expected. The Texas Brigade itself, we already talked about, was kind of confused. The regiments on the left side with the 3rd Arkansas, Philip Work, they're going up the Emmitsburg Road, marching along. We're following our orders. We're following our orders. We're following our orders. Wait a minute, where's everyone else going? And so they got pulled down toward the Devil's Den with the rest of the brigade, scratching their heads a little like, I thought we were supposed to go that way. So, yes.
Okay. Kershaw, second question. Kershaw's brigade, it seems to me, suffers from the echelon progression more so than any other brigade because of its position in what I refer to as a bowl in the Rose Farm area. Kershaw is vulnerable to artillery in the Peach Orchard, Trossel Farm area while waiting for Barksdale to be turned loose, and also vulnerable on his right in the melee for Stony Hill and the wheat field waiting on Semmes or Wofford to come to his support. Do you think Kershaw had any chance at all keeping his command together even if the ill-fated right flank order had not been issued?
Well, his command got split up as they launched their attack.
Yeah. And that's on purpose. That's not accidental with Law's Brigade.
Right. That was not. Right. Law's Brigade is like, what are you guys doing over there? Let's go that way.
Right.
Yeah, that was the 3rd and the 7th, the spearhead of the brigade attacking Stony Hill. That was very deliberate. He didn't have to worry about the fact that the 15th Alabama was not coming in on his right flank because Semmes' entire brigade was coming in on the right flank, and the 15th South Carolina, William Disarray, joined them. Make matters worse, of course, their commander was killed crossing the field, so that always helps
the 15th.
in the disarray, the 15th commander. Yeah. Kershaw himself had described him as the best officer in his brigade, former United States Senator, oldest officer in the brigade, Mexican War veteran, and he didn't get across the field.
Do you think the Rose Farm property also contributed to the split in his command?
The terrain, would the terrain have split?
Well, I think he means the buildings.
Well, they went around the two sides.
Yeah.
7th to the right, 3rd to the left.
Okay.
I think the swampland, that contributed because the 3rd marched into what they described as a morass, and they're like, oh, well, what's this? And that can slow things down.
Sure. Finally, is Longstreet responsible for Kershaw's difficulties by not letting Barksdale advance sooner? And is it at this point that Longstreet may have given up the order to move up the Emmitsburg Road as Lee directed?
I think, as we talked about, by that time, the move up the Emmitsburg Road was that had vanished.
Yeah.
Kershaw certainly said that in his reports, that he was disappointed that Barksdale was not coming in to support his left. But it's Longstreet's division. And Longstreet wanted, but remember, he's controlling McLaws' division.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah, gotcha.
So, Longstreet will hold Barksdale, and then he will lead Wofford. And Wofford normally would have followed Barksdale in his turn to the left up the Emmitsburg Road. That's why Longstreet's with him. He didn't want him to.
Okay.
He wanted him to get into the wheat field. And as it turned out, Wofford is the one who swept the wheat field and probably saved countless Confederate lives in the attack and the fight that was going on there. Certainly in Semmes' brigade, because Brooks' brigade, which was up on the top of the ridge by the Rose Farm, fell back just when they saw Wofford.
Okay.
And so that certainly took the pressure off of Semmes' brigade, and one would expect to have reduced their losses.
And we've kind of we've kind of touched on this too with some of the questions and just the discussion. But Brian took the time to send it in. So Brian Duranick says, "Did the delay in the advance of the 15th South Carolina and its inability to conform to and protect the right of Kershaw's brigade impact the left of the brigade when it mistakenly shifted to the right, exposing its flank to Union artillery in the Peach Orchard?"
I don't think so. That's a different area. They would have been on the flank of the 7th, and as it turns out, Semmes was coming in on that. So that was, the 15th South Carolina ended up coming in with Semmes. So he had troops coming in. Granted, they were Georgia, not South Carolina, but nevertheless, he had troops coming in.
Yeah.
I don't think the 7th right flank really came into jeopardy. They got hit from the front and from the left after they held the Stony Hill when the Second Corps, when Caldwell's division arrived. They weren't getting hit from the right, so the right flank was not an issue for them. It was their left and their front.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, that's all the questions that we have from our patrons. Ralph, thank you very much for coming in. I really always enjoy having you on here. It's always interesting.
I hope it wasn't too discombobulated, but let us all march to the Rose Farm Lane and take off our hats and stand there on that square foot of dirt. You pick any square foot. I have mine. And
yours is shady.
Yes, I stand under the tree. A critical decision that was completely plausible and understandable, and it eliminated any chance of breaking the Union hold on Cemetery Hill.
Yeah. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got a lot out of it. I mean, we did cover a lot more than just the brigade here at Gettysburg, and I like that. I like the background that we got into and everything. Maybe we'll have to have you come on. You were saying before the show that you're really becoming fascinated by the whole lost cause.
I am, and I will add one thing as we sign off: is let's all do what we can, contribute in what way we can to make sure that the monuments at Gettysburg, Union and Confederate, are preserved to maintain the battlefield as we know it, and people who oppose the thinking and the theory of the lost cause should recognize that it's actually these are fascinating artifacts to a strange period in American history where the outcome of the Civil War was kind of rewritten for a century.
Yeah.
And those are the artifacts of that event. And I think that gives them value.
I always say that they're good teaching tools to talk about not necessarily the people they represent, but the people who put them up and the times that they were put up in and what was going on.
Yeah.
Not that you couldn't do that if you removed them, but I think, I don't know, people need that tangible thing.
I start this tour standing in front of the South Carolina Memorial, talking about George Wallace, talking about the politics of the moment when that monument was dedicated, and talking about their use of the phrase states' rights, and that in my view, they're the one state that actually had some credence in that, because for them this has been a multi-generational dispute with the federal government over state sovereignty. Where with a lot of these other states, they just kind of piggybacked onto that idea.
Yeah.
South Carolina, too large to be an insane asylum. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for us, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again. We'll talk to you next time. Hope you're doing well. Need a Corps badge or other insignia for your uniform? Then check out the Badge Maker. Here's what some of his satisfied customers had to say. Miranda said, "I ordered an identification disc from Joe and it's fantastic. He hand-stamped it exactly as I wanted." Greg said, "My unit has purchased from him in the past quality badges and good service." And Jerry S. says, "The Badge Maker is the go-to place for accurate replica Civil War badges." So go to CivilWarCorpsBadges.com and attach a message with your order saying you heard about him on Addressing Gettysburg.
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Garryowen in glory. Instead of spa or drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail, no man for debt shall go to jail from Garryowen in glory. Instead of spa or drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail, no man for debt shall go to jail from Garryowen.